Natalie Chen stared at her laptop screen, the rejection email blurring before her tired eyes. Another thank you for your interest, but message that felt like a punch to her already bruised confidence. 6 months of unemployment had drained her savings and her spirit. Her small apartment felt like a prison, walls closing in with each passing day of fruitless job hunting. The rain pelted against her window as she scrolled through job listings for the 100th time that week. Most positions either required years of experience she didn't have or offered salaries that wouldn't cover her rent. Her marketing degree, once a source of pride, now felt like expensive paper gathering dust. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, her best friend since college. Found something perfect for you. Kane Industries is hiring. Deadline tonight. Natalie's heart skipped. Kane Industries was legendary in the business world, but so was its CEO. Sebastian Kane had built an empire from nothing. But stories of his demanding nature were equally famous. Employees either thrived under his leadership or burned out within months. There was rarely any middle ground, the building that touched the sky the next morning. Natalie stood before the gleaming towers of Kane Industries, her reflection multiplied in the glass facade. The building seemed to pierce the clouds, a monument to ambition and success. Her black suit, the most professional outfit she owned, felt inadequate against the backdrop of such corporate grandeur. The lobby buzzed with energy. People in expensive suits moved with purpose, their conversations filled with numbers and deadlines. Everyone looked like they belonged. Natalie clutched her portfolio tighter, fighting the urge to turn around and leave. Natalie Chen for the marketing position, she told the receptionist, a polished woman who barely looked up from her screen. 42nd floor, elevator bank 3. You're expected. Elevator ride felt eternal. Each floor that passed made her stomach tighten. She had researched Sebastian Kane extensively, but nothing could prepare her for meeting him in person. His interviews were legendary for their intensity. Candidates had reportedly left in tears. The man behind the legend, the 42nd floor, was a study in minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below. The assistant, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes, gestured toward a set of imposing double doors. He's waiting for you. Remember to breathe. Natalie knocked twice before entering. The office was even more impressive than the lobby. Modern art adorned the walls, and a massive desk dominated the space. Behind it sat Sebastian Kane. Not looking up from the documents before him, he was younger than she had expected. Probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair and sharp features that belonged on magazine covers, rather than in boardrooms. When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, Natalie felt the air leave her lungs. His gaze was intense, calculating, as if he could see right through her carefully constructed facade. Sit, he said, his voice carrying an authority that made her knees weak. You have exactly 15 minutes to convince me you're not wasting my time. Natalie sat, her prepared speech suddenly feeling inadequate. Sebastian's eyes never left her face as he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Your resume is impressive for someone with no real experience, he began, his tone neutral but somehow cutting. Tell me why you think you can handle working here. 'Cause I'm not afraid of hard work, Natalie replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. And because I know what it's like to have nothing and fight for everything. Flickered in Sebastian's eyes. Interest, maybe. Or amusement at her boldness. The impossible standards. I don't believe in coddling employees, Sebastian continued, his gaze never wavering. This company succeeds because we demand excellence, not mediocrity. If you can't handle pressure, you'll break within a week. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Even in silhouette, his presence filled the room. I'm offering you 30 days, a trial period. If you survive, you get the position. If you don't, you leave and never come back. Natalie's heart raced. This wasn't a typical job offer. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down. What exactly would be expected of me? Sebastian turned back to face her, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a kind smile. Everything. You'll work directly under me. Late nights, weekends, whatever it takes. You'll handle high-pressure clients, impossible deadlines, and my exacting standards. Most people can't handle it. I'm not most people, Natalie said, meeting his gaze directly. We'll see. He returned to his desk, picking up a pen. Your trial starts Monday. Don't be late. Don't make excuses. And don't expect any special treatment because you're new. Natalie stood, extending her hand. Thank you for the opportunity. Sebastian looked at her outstretched hand for a moment before taking it. His grip was firm, confident, and sent an unexpected jolt through her system. Don't thank me yet. You haven't survived day one. First day storm Monday morning arrived. With the fury of a winter storm, Natalie had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. She arrived at the office 30 minutes early, determined to make a good impression. The marketing department was already buzzing with activity. Her new colleagues, a mix of ambitious young professionals and seasoned veterans, barely acknowledged her presence. She could feel their curious glances and whispered conversations. Must be the new trial employee, said a woman with auburn hair and a sharp suit. I'm Jennifer. A word of advice, keep your head down and don't take anything personally. Sebastian's bark is worse than his bite, but his bite can still end careers. Before Natalie could respond, Sebastian's voice cut through the morning chatter. Conference room now. The team filed in like soldiers preparing for battle. Sebastian stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding immediate attention. He began rattling off assignments, deadlines, and expectations at a pace that made Natalie's head spin. Natalie, he said, his eyes finding hers across the table. You'll be handling the Morrison account presentation? It's due Friday. Don't disappoint me. The Morrison account was worth millions, and Natalie had never handled anything remotely. Close to its scope, she felt the weight of every gaze in the room. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed curious to see how quickly she would fail. Late nights and revelations the rest of the week blurred together in a haze of research, client calls, and endless revisions. Natalie found herself staying later. Each night, the office gradually emptying until it was just her and the cleaning crew. The Morrison presentation consumed her thoughts, each detail scrutinized and refined. On Thursday night, she was alone in the conference room, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. When Sebastian appeared in the doorway, he had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking more human than the corporate machine she had met on Monday. Still here? He observed, stepping into the room. Most people would have given up by now. I'm not most people. Natalie repeated her words from the interview, not looking up from her work. Sebastian moved closer, glancing at her presentation materials spread across the table. Show me what you have so far. For the next hour, Natalie walked him through her strategy, her voice growing more confident as she spoke. Sebastian listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that pushed her to think deeper. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. It's good, he said finally. Better than I expected, but good isn't enough for Morrison. They'll tear apart anything less than perfect. Instead of discouragement, Natalie felt a surge of determination. Then help me make it perfect. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. That's not how this works. You sink or swim on your own merit. But you want this presentation to succeed, Natalie? Countered, your reputation is on the line too. For a moment, something shifted in Sebastian's expression. The cold mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath. You're either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both, Natalie admitted. Sebastian sat down across from her, pulling the presentation materials closer. Fine. We'll work on it together. But this doesn't change anything about your trial, period. As they worked side by side, Natalie began to see cracks in Sebastian's armor. He was brilliant, yes, but also lonely. His dedication to perfection seemed to stem from something deeper than mere ambition. When he smiled at a particularly clever idea, his whole face transformed. The presentation that changed everything Friday arrived with nervous energy crackling through the office. The Morrison clients were due at 2 o'clock, and Natalie had barely slept the night before. Her presentation was as perfect as she could make it. But perfection in Sebastian's world was a moving target. The clients arrived in expensive suits and skeptical expressions. Mr. Morrison, Sylph was a silver-haired man, with sharp eyes who had built his fortune on recognizing potential and exploiting weakness. His team flanked him like a corporate army. Sebastian introduced Natalie with minimal fanfare. This is Natalie Chen. She'll be presenting our strategy for your expansion into the Asian markets. Natalie felt the weight of expectation as she took her place at the front of the room. Sebastian sat at the far end of the table, his expression unreadable. This was her moment, her chance to prove she belonged in this world of high stakes and higher expectations. She began to speak, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. As she laid out her research, her strategy, her vision for Morrison's future, she felt the room's energy shift. Questions came fast and sharp, but she had prepared for her. Each one, by the time she finished, even Mr. Morrison was leaning forward with interest. "Impressive," Morrison said, his gruff voice carrying approval. "When can we start?" The meeting ended with handshakes and signed contracts. As the clients filed out, chattering excitedly about the campaign, Natalie felt a rush of triumph unlike anything she had ever experienced. "Well done," Sebastian said, quietly appearing beside her as the room emptied. That was exactly what they needed to hear. "We did it," Natalie said, the exhaustion of the week finally catching up with her. "You did it," Sebastian corrected. "I just watched." For a moment, they stood alone in the conference room, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Natalie could feel something shifting between them, a recognition that went beyond professional respect. Sebastian's usual cold demeanor had softened, replaced by something that looked almost like admiration. 1 week down, he said finally, 23 to go. But as he turned to leave, Natalie caught something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. The next 3 weeks suddenly seemed both too long and not nearly long enough. The storm clouds that had gathered all week finally broke. Rain lashing against the windows as if the sky itself was celebrating her victory.
Natalie gathered her materials,
knowing that everything had changed. She had survived her first test. But something told her the real challenge was just beginning. Sebastian Kane was no longer just her demanding boss. He was becoming something far more dangerous. Someone who could break down all the walls she had built around her heart. And despite every rational thought telling her to keep her distance, she found herself looking forward to Monday morning and whatever impossible task he would throw at her next. The game had begun. And Natalie was no longer sure who was the hunter. And who was the prey? The weekend had passed in a blur of celebration and anxiety. Natalie's success with the Morrison account had earned her respect from her colleagues. But she knew Sebastian's approval was temporary. Monday morning brought new challenges, and with them, a different kind of tension. Sebastian seemed more distant than usual during the morning briefing. His eyes barely met hers as he assigned her to work on the Phillips merger, a complex deal that had been stalling for months. The previous team had failed to find a solution that satisfied both parties. The Phillips family wants to maintain control while selling majority shares, Sebastian explained to the room. It's a contradiction that's cost us 3 months of negotiations. Natalie, you have 2 weeks to find a creative solution. Jennifer leaned over as the meeting dispersed. He's testing you again. Phillips Sr. is notoriously difficult. He's made grown men cry in boardrooms. Natalie spent the morning diving into the case files, her mind racing through possibilities. The Phillips family had built their company. Over 3 generations, an emotional attachment ran as deep as financial concerns. She needed to understand not just the numbers, but the hearts behind them. Late-night revelations by Wednesday, Natalie had identified the core issue, the Phillips. Family feared losing their legacy, while the potential buyers wanted operational control. She was sketching out a solution when Sebastian appeared at her desk. "Working late again," he observed, his voice softer than his usual commanding tone. "The Phillips case is more complex than I thought," Natalie replied, not looking up from her. Notes, "It's not just about money, it's about identity." Sebastian pulled up a chair beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. The proximity made her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to focus on the documents spread before them. "Show me what you're thinking," he said, as Natalie explained her approach. She noticed Sebastian watching her face more than her presentation. When she stumbled over a particularly complex financial structure, he leaned closer to point out an error on her screen. His hand brushed hers, and the contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. "Sorry," he said, but didn't move away immediately. For a moment, they sat in charged silence. The office around them was empty, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. Natalie could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet. "Why do you stay so late?" Surprising herself with the personal question. Sebastian's expression shifted, the corporate mask slipping slightly. "Habit, I suppose. Empty apartments have a way of feeling smaller than busy offices. It was the first truly personal thing he had ever shared with her. Natalie felt a rush of warmth at being trusted with even this small admission. "I understand," she said quietly. "Success can be lonely." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, Natalie saw past his carefully constructed facade. Beneath the ruthless businessman was someone who carried the weight of his achievements like armor, protecting himself from connections that might make him vulnerable. "We should focus on Philip," Sebastian said abruptly, the moment shattered. But as he leaned back, Natalie caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite identify. The Phillips. Breakthrough Thursday brought the Phillips family to the office for what everyone assumed would be another failed negotiation. Robert Phillips Sr. arrived with his son and daughter, all wearing expressions of resigned skepticism. The potential buyers, an investment firm known for aggressive restructuring, looked equally pessimistic. Natalie had spent the previous night perfecting her presentation. Her solution was unconventional, requiring trust from both parties and a willingness to think beyond traditional merger structures. "What if we created a dual-class structure with a twist?" she began, her confidence growing as she outlined her plan. "The Phillips family retains voting control through a family trust, but operational decisions are shared through a rotating board structure. The buyers get their ROI through performance-based equity increases, while the family maintains their legacy through community investment requirements." The room was silent as she explained the financial mechanisms that would make it work. Robert Phillips Sr. frowned, but it was a thoughtful frown rather than dismissive. "You're suggesting we maintain control while giving it up?" he said slowly. "I'm suggesting you evolve control," Natalie corrected. "Your company succeeds because of your values. This structure protects those values while allowing for growth capital." The negotiation that followed was intense, but productive. By evening, both parties had agreed to a framework that seemed impossible just hours earlier. As handshakes were exchanged and preliminary agreements signed, Natalie felt Sebastian's eyes on her. "Brilliant work," Robert Phillips told her as they prepared to leave. "You understand what matters." After the clients departed, Sebastian approached her desk. "That was exceptional. You didn't just solve their financial problem, you addressed their emotional needs. Sometimes the best solutions come from understanding what people really want," Natalie replied. Sebastian was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "What do you want, Natalie?" Question caught her off guard. The context of their growing attraction, it felt loaded with meaning. "I want to prove I belong here," she said carefully. "You've already done that," Sebastian replied. "What else?" Their conversation was interrupted by the cleaning crew's arrival. But Sebastian's question lingered in Natalie's mind long after she left the office. The dinner that changed everything Friday evening, Sebastian surprised everyone by suggesting the team celebrate the Phillips' success at an upscale restaurant. The group of 8 settled into a private dining room, wine flowing as the stress of the week melted away. Natalie found herself seated beside Sebastian. It's close enough to observe details she usually missed in the office, the way he listened intently. When others spoke, how his rare, genuine smiles transformed his entire face. The unconscious way he drummed his fingers when thinking. As the evening progressed, her colleagues gradually departed, until only Natalie and Sebastian remained. The restaurant had grown quiet, candles casting warm shadows across their table. "You don't talk much about yourself," Sebastian observed, refilling their wine glasses. "There's not much to say. Small-town girl makes it to the big city through determination and student loans. That's not nothing. It's everything," Sebastian said, his voice serious. "I grew up with advantages you didn't have. Money, connections, expectations. You built yourself from scratch." "We all have our challenges," Natalie replied diplomatically. "Tell me about yours." The wine had loosened her tongue, and Natalie found herself sharing stories she rarely told. Her father's abandonment when she was 12, her mother's 2 jobs to keep them afloat. The scholarship that made college possible but came with crushing pressure to succeed. And "I spent my childhood afraid of disappointing the people who believed in me," she concluded. "Sometimes I still feel like that scared little girl pretending to belong in rooms like this." Sebastian listened without interrupting, his expression growing more intense as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I understand." "That fear," he said finally. "Different circumstances. Same doubt. Success doesn't eliminate insecurity, It just gives you better hiding places. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Yet, Natalie felt something fundamental shifting in how she saw him. The ruthless boss was also a man who questioned himself, who carried his own wounds beneath the polished exterior. The rain and the choice. They left the restaurant to find rain pouring from the evening sky. Sebastian's driver was stuck in traffic, and taxis were nowhere to be found. They took shelter under the restaurant's awning, watching. The city washed itself clean in the downpour. "My apartment is just a few blocks away," Natalie said impulsively. "You could wait there for your driver." Sebastian turned to study her face, rain misting around them. That might not be wise. "Probably not," Natalie agreed. "But standing in the rain isn't wise either." They ran through the storm, laughing despite themselves as they dodged puddles and awnings. By the time they reached Natalie's building, they were both soaked and breathless. The elevator ride to her floor was thick with tension and the scent of rain dampened fabric. Natalie's apartment was modest but warm, a stark contrast to the corporate environments where they usually interacted. Sebastian looked around with interest, taking in her bookshelves, artwork, the photos of family and friends that made the space personal. "I'll get you a towel," Natalie said, suddenly nervous about having her boss in her private space. When she returned, Sebastian was standing by her window, looking out at the storm. His usual commanding presence seemed different here, more human and approachable. "Your home feels like you," he said without turning around. "What do you mean? Warm? Genuine? No pretense?" Natalie handed him the towel, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Neither pulled away immediately, and she found herself looking up into his eyes, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time, without the barrier of office dynamics. "Natalie," he said softly, her name carrying weight she had never heard before. "Yes, I think we're in dangerous territory." "I know," she whispered. "If we cross this line, everything changes. Your career, my reputation, the way people see us both. I understand the risks." Sebastian stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth despite their damp clothes. "Do you? Because I'm not sure I can go back to just being your boss. If this happens, what if I don't want you to go back?" The question escaped before she could stop it, but she didn't regret it. They had been dancing around this attraction for weeks, and the pretense was becoming unbearable. Sebastian's hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You don't know what you're asking for. Then show me." Sebastian's resistance crumbled in that moment. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. All the tension, all the carefully maintained, professional distance dissolved in the space between heartbeats. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Sebastian rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he were trying to memorize the moment. "This complicates everything," he murmured. "I know," Natalie replied, but she didn't step away. They spent the next hour talking in a way they never had before, without the office around them, without the pressure of work and hierarchies. They were simply two people discovering they understood each other in ways that went far beyond professional compatibility. Sebastian spoke about the isolation that came with his position, how every relationship felt filtered through his wealth and power. Natalie shared her fears about never feeling quite good enough, always waiting for someone to realize she didn't belong. "I've been watching you for weeks," Sebastian admitted as they sat on her couch, the storm still raging outside. "Not just your work, though, that's been exceptional. The way you treat people, how you solve problems, by understanding rather than overpowering. You make me want to be better than I am. You're already better than you think," Natalie said. "You just hide it behind impossible standards and distance. I had to. Showing weakness in my world is dangerous." "I'm not your world," Natalie pointed out. "I'm not a competitor or a board member or someone trying to use you. I'm just someone who sees you." Sebastian looked at her with an expression of wonder, as if the concept of being truly seen was foreign to him. "What happens now? I don't know," Natalie admitted, "but I'd like to find out." The office tension Monday morning brought reality crashing back. They had agreed to maintain professionalism at work, but the knowledge of what had passed between them created an undercurrent of tension that was impossible to ignore. Sebastian was strictly professional during meetings, but Natalie caught him watching her when he thought no one was looking. Their brief interactions over documents or schedules carried subtext that made her pulse. Jennifer noticed the change immediately. "Something's different about you," she observed over lunch. "You seem more confident, more settled." Natalie deflected the observation, but internally she knew Jennifer was right. The uncertainty about Sebastian's feelings had been replaced by the knowledge that the attraction was mutual. Even if they couldn't act on it openly, she felt more secure in her position. The real test came Thursday, when Sebastian assigned her to lead a high-stakes presentation for a potential client worth more than her previous 2 successes combined. The Hartwell Corporation was considering a major rebranding, and several firms were competing for the contract. "This is your chance to prove you're ready for a permanent position," Sebastian announced to the team, but his eyes lingered on Natalie. "Don't waste it." The presentation that proved everything. Natalie threw herself into the Hartwell project with everything she had learned over the past month. She spent sleepless nights researching their corporate culture, their market position, their competitors' strengths and weaknesses. Her strategy was bold, risky, and exactly what Hartwell needed, even if they didn't know it yet. The presentation day arrived with autumn's first truly cold morning. The Hartwell executives filled the conference room like judges preparing for a verdict. CEO Margaret Hartwell was known for her sharp questions and sharper tongue. Natalie began her presentation with confidence that surprised even herself. She outlined a complete corporate transformation that went beyond simple rebranding to address fundamental market positioning. Her research was thorough, her strategy innovative, and her delivery flawless. "You're suggesting we completely reimagine our customer base," Margaret Hartwell observed when Natalie finished. "I'm suggesting you acknowledge that your customer base has already changed," Natalie replied. "You can either evolve with them or watch competitors capture the market you built." The questions came fast and aggressive, but Natalie was ready for each one. She had anticipated their concerns, prepared responses to their objections, and crafted solutions for every obstacle they raised. When the Hartwell team left for deliberation, the conference room fell silent. Sebastian remained seated, while the other team members filed out, chattering nervously about the presentation. "That was incredible," he said, when they were alone. "You didn't just meet their expectations, you exceeded mine." "Does this mean I passed the 30-day trial?" Natalie asked, suddenly realizing how much his answer mattered. "You passed that weeks ago," Sebastian replied, standing and moving closer. "This was about something else entirely." "What?" "Proving to myself that my feelings for you weren't affecting my judgment about your abilities." Natalie's heart raced at his casual mention of his feelings. "And you're brilliant, capable, and absolutely essential to this team. My attraction to you has nothing to do with your professional value." Before Natalie could respond, Sebastian's assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Mr. Kane, Margaret Hartwell is on line 1. She wants to discuss terms." They had won the contract. As Sebastian took the call, his eyes never left Natalie's face. She had done more than survive her trial period. She had transformed from a desperate job seeker into an integral part of his company. The choice that changed everything that evening. Sebastian asked Natalie to stay after hours. The office was empty, except for security, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. "I have something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his desk drawer. Inside was a formal job offer, not for the position she had originally interviewed for, but for a senior role with significant responsibilities and a salary that made her dizzy. "This is too much," she protested. "I've only been here a month." "You've earned it," Sebastian replied firmly. "But there's a condition." Natalie's stomach dropped. "What kind of condition?" "If you take this position, we have to address what's happening between us. Can't continue pretending it doesn't exist." "What are you suggesting?" Sebastian moved around his desk to stand before her. "I'm suggesting we stop fighting this. I know it's complicated. I know there are risks. But I can't continue working beside you every day while pretending I don't." "Want more?" "The company has policies about relationships between supervisors and employees," Natalie pointed out. "I'm the CEO. I make the policies," Sebastian said with a slight smile. "And I'm willing to transfer you to report to James instead of me. Your career won't be compromised." Natalie studied his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath his confident Exterior, he was taking an enormous risk, potentially exposing himself to scandal and criticism for her. What if it doesn't work out between us, she asked. What if we try this, and it ruins everything? Then we'll deal with the consequences like adults, Sebastian replied. But I'd rather risk failure than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Natalie looked at the job offer in her hands, then at the man before her. A month ago, she had been desperate for any employment. She was being offered not just a career but a chance at something she had never expected to find. There's one more thing you should know, Sebastian said softly. I'm not just asking you to be my employee or even my colleague. I'm asking you to be my partner, in every sense of the word. Are you proposing? Natalie asked, with a nervous laugh. Not yet, Sebastian replied, his smile becoming genuine. Yes, but I'm hoping I'll have the chance to someday.
Yes.
The honesty in his voice, the hope in his eyes, the future he was offering, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Yes, Natalie said, her voice strong and certain. Yes to the job, yes to trying this between us, and yes to whatever comes next.
What are you, Sebastian?
Smile transformed his entire face as he pulled her into his arms. The kiss they shared was different from their first, deeper and full of promise rather than just desire. 6 months later, the Kane Industries holiday party was in full swing. The company's most successful year celebrated in the penthouse ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. Natalie moved through the crowd in a midnight blue dress that Sebastian had insisted on buying for her. Comfortable now in a way she had never imagined possible. Her transition to senior marketing director had been seamless. Her team respected her leadership, and her innovations had contributed significantly to the company's record profits. More importantly, her relationship with Sebastian had grown stronger rather than creating the complications everyone had predicted. You look stunning, Sebastian murmured in her ear as he brought her a glass of champagne. You clean up pretty? Well, yourself, she replied, admiring him in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. They had learned to balance their professional and personal lives with careful boundaries and clear communication. At work, they were colleagues who happened to be in love. At home, they were partners building something beautiful together. I have something for you, Sebastian said, his voice carrying a nervous edge she rarely heard anymore. It's not Christmas. Yet, Natalie protested. This can't wait. Sebastian guided her to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the celebrating crowd. The city sparkled below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, a reminder of how far they had both come. Natalie Chen, Sebastian began, his voice soft but clear. 6 months ago, you walked into my office as a desperate job candidate. Become my most trusted advisor, my greatest inspiration, and the love of my life. Natalie's breath caught as Sebastian dropped to one knee, producing a ring box that caught the light from 1,000 chandeliers. I know this is fast. I know people will talk, but I can't imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me? The ballroom seemed to fade away as Natalie looked down at the man who had challenged her, supported her, and ultimately chosen her above all the complications their love might bring. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. As Sebastian slipped the ring onto her finger, the crowd around them erupted in applause. Colleagues who had watched their careful courtship beamed with approval, and even the skeptics seemed charmed by the obvious joy on both their faces. Jennifer appeared at Natalie's elbow, tears in her eyes. I knew something was different about you from that very first week. You were glowing. I was terrified, Natalie admitted. The best things usually start with terror, Sebastian said, standing and pulling her close. But they end with this. As they danced to soft music while snow began to fall outside, Natalie reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 30 days that were supposed to be a professional trial had become the foundation for a love that transformed both their lives. No regrets? Sebastian asked as they swayed together. Only that we wasted those first few weeks fighting it, Natalie replied. Those weeks were necessary, Sebastian said thoughtfully. We needed to respect each other professionally before we could love each other personally. And now we have both. Forever. The music played on, and Natalie knew that their story was just beginning. The ruthless boss had become her greatest champion, and the desperate job seeker had become the woman who tamed his heart. In the end, the greatest risk they had taken was trusting in love. and it had rewarded them beyond their wildest dreams. Outside, snow continued to fall on the city that had brought them together. A reminder that even the coldest beginnings could lead to the warmest endings.